Hello, welcome to Colonel O'Truth's Miniature Issues. In today's episode, we're venturing back inside Undercrag Mountain to High Keep Cavern District. I'll be building houses, a winding stair, and a gloomy passageway that leads to the outside world. And it'll get so fiddly that I have to cut my paintbrush in half. Look out for that. This is Undercrag City. This piece will sit in the back corner of the model, above the undergate and behind Hanging Peak House. You can also see the back of the stairs from Ceiling Lane. I've decided to build this as a box, a standalone piece that I can slot into the main model later. I've constructed a framework from foam board and card, and a removable floor on which I can plan the piece. Now I'm sketching straight onto the box. The complicated shape of the box means that this is guaranteed to be an interesting design. I'm planning my stairs first. I'll build everything else around them. I have a rough concept in mind, but as always, I'm leaving myself open to change. With the stairs roughly sketched, I start carving them out of a piece of foam. This doesn't have to be neat and tidy. In fact, I don't want it to be. Now I'm preparing an offcut of foam board, and I'm going to draw in paving. I must have done 10,000 of these stones by now, maybe more. I certainly haven't been counting. All of this sketching is purely conjecture. It could easily change later on. Drawing the stones into the stairs. And when I'm happy, in they go. So it's on to the next bit. I'd like to take a moment to thank you all for your support. We've gained a lot of subscribers and views recently, which has been really encouraging. If you haven't subscribed already, please do. And maybe give us some likes and share these videos. Thank you. So now I'm shaping the next set of stairs, cutting out the steps. As usual, I'm doing this by eye. They're not intended to be regular. Try them in place, and make a change. That's better. I'm trying to avoid too many right angles. I want this to look organic, as if the builders simply followed the natural lines of the stone when they discovered this cavern. And here's the base I cut earlier. I built some steps in the corner for the passageway through to High Keep Lane. The rounded steps that you can see mirror those of the undergate far below. Originally, I thought the subterranean castle would continue up through the inside of the mountain. The passageway needs a back wall, By placing the archway in such a manner that you can't see to the end of the passage, it will give the illusion of continuing much further. I've also detailed some of the stones. This is going to need to be painted before I can close it in. Now we make sure that fits under the stairs. It does, but I want more room. So I'm roughing up the edge of the stairs with a knife and pulling it apart with my thumb to give a stone effect. That can go back in again now. Now I've decided that I want the floor to be much thicker, giving a greater thickness of stone between this piece and the undergate. So I'm building a framework to raise up the floor. And I've also torn off the rounded steps. I'm playing around with the shape of the stairs and thinking about where my houses are going to sit. Time to cut more steps. There are some rough patches here, but that's good. I like the idea that the steps would be so old that they're worn and broken in places. Just trying things out, visualizing, cutting, carving away what I don't need. Let's see how it looks so far. Back to the passageway, and more stonework. That's better. It occurred to me that I didn't need to stay all on one flat level, and in fact I shouldn't. So I've made a small section of steps and closed them in, and I'm going to cut this into the base of the model. The steps are much wider than they will need to be. When it comes time to add clay to the model, some of this width will be lost. It doesn't have to be a perfect fit, but that's pretty good. It's time to line the back wall of the passageway. It needs to look like rough stone, not flat cardboard. So some red dust clay, plenty of PVA, and we might as well move on to the steps at the same time. I need to paint and finish the inside of the passageway before I can put the arch in place. I might as well get some paint on the rest. Painting all of the stonework like this so early in the piece doesn't make a lot of sense, but it helps me to imagine the world I'm building. Now I'm planning the wall that will sit at the top of the model. This is going to have arched windows, similar to those on Cloister Lane, and the stairwell that leads up from Ceiling Lane. All of my arches are going to be the same size and level with each other. This circle stencil gets a lot of use. And here's my archway. With all of my components cut, I'll start putting things together. This is the large doorway that will sit above everything else. I'm putting it together the same way I did the one on the stairwell from Ceiling Lane. Layering in this way is much more interesting than just a flat piece of card. And I'm modifying the front corner as well, to give myself a better view into the model. There's my back wall. You may recognize these columns. I made them from beads and skewers weeks ago when I built the cloister. Now I'm heading back into the alleyway, adding some texture with sand. I've added some nice chunky rock to the wall there. Highlighted the alleyway, and here's my black ink wash. And my green. And my yellow. Now I'm poking an LED through the wall. This will give me some hidden flickering light from inside the passageway. Finally, I can put my arch in place. And my cardboard buildings. These have been put together in the usual way. There's nothing complicated about them, except that they sit at varying heights in the model. So now it's time to add balsa wood details. These are 2mm wide strips of thin balsa, as usual. Starting with my main horizontals, and then I'll move on to my verticals and details. You can see there's an LED poking into the side here. I've had to think about where the buildings will sit, and the best way to get wiring to them, while also avoiding making the LEDs too visible through the windows. They start to take shape quite quickly. Quick dab of PVA on the faithful pointy stick. I only need to detail the visible sides. And having done that, I can move on to the doors. hand drawing planks for a rough effect. Cut it into small sections. And in we go. Some of them are a bit fiddly. And a couple of these buildings need roofs. A roof might be an odd thing to have inside a cave, but I'm sure the constant dripping of water from above would justify it. Paper's gone on, and I soak it with water and black ink to make it sag. And prepare a sheet of roof tiles. And on we go, one at a time, from the bottom to the top. Time to give them an undercoat. The heavier timbers are pieces of matchstick. With the undercoat dry, brown ink over everything. You can already see it has an irregular, patchy appearance. This is good. It's all going to add visual interest later on. I'll let those dry and move on to my columns. They've been glued in place, and now I need to give them some stone texture along with the doorway. So I'm adding a thin coat of PVA and sprinkling them with baking soda. Now let's see how we're looking so far. The ink's dry. Everything gets a heavy dry brush of pale yellow, making sure to get plenty in the panels. And now white. It doesn't take long for the dry brushed paint to dry, and I can move on to my brown ink for all of my timber work. I'm making sure I get all of the edges as well as the front faces. This is three-dimensional after all. And my roof tiles need the characteristic rust orange that's ubiquitous in Undercrag City. When all that's done, I can add my window glass. I've been working my way through this sheet of acetate for a while now. I coated the whole sheet with Mod Podge on both sides to slightly obscure it and help catch the light from the LEDs. It doesn't matter if a bit of PVA is visible on the glass, it'll dry clear and help to obscure the light further. Now some more LEDs. Marking my polarity. And finally closing in the building. I need to add some timber detailing. It's time to add hinges to the doors. Tiny pieces of thin black card. A touch of silver paint. And a touch of rust ink. Done. And in we go. Looking pretty good. When I was building this piece, it put me in mind of building a stage set. It's a standalone scene in its own right. And I had to give plenty of thought to the angles that things could be viewed from. Now using offcuts, I'm building up the rest of the shape. And it's time to start sculpting my clay. I add the clay on top of a generous helping of PVA in small blobs, and then sculpt it with a brush and more glue. Everything that isn't architecture needs to look like natural stone. It doesn't need to be a thick coating, it just needs to add texture and break up the straight lines. My windows need to be nice sharp arches, so I'll keep scraping them out. When I'm happy with it, I'm adding some sand to break up the joins between the buildings and the ground. And some patches of moss elsewhere as well. And now everything that's stone gets painted dark grey. This model got so fiddly that I had to cut up a paintbrush in order to get inside. It looks rather grim at this stage. After letting that dry thoroughly, back to my dry brushing. Pale grey followed by white. I really enjoy the dry brushing process. It brings everything to life so quickly. It's all looking very solid now. Some of the timber needs a bit of a tidy up. And I've scraped through to the red clay in a couple of places. That needs to be tidied up as well. And those white panels at the front. Now a black ink wash over everything. This is 1 part ink, 16 parts water. It'll fade as it dries. And now my green. Little patches here and there where my mosses are. I'm not looking for uniformity. I want to create different tones. So when I wash out the green with yellow, I get various different effects. That's much less gloomy. Now I can move on to my larger doors. This is balsa prepared in the same way as the ones on the houses. I've just glued it onto thick pieces of card. Drawing in the central line for my double doors. And now it's time to put them in place. With all of the main details in, I can start to close in the model. I've still got the whole roof to build. This piece of card has LEDs, one corresponding to each of the windows. You can see I've added in acetate glass, and I've drawn LED grids in with a Sharpie. I'm connecting all of my LEDs together. It's time to add the roof. I've added some extra height. Once I've sculpted the roof, I still want to see everything that's in there, so I don't want to get in my own way. I'm using offcuts of foam board, fairly randomly, in rough triangular shapes running back to front. With all of my irregularities in place, I can start sculpting with my clay again. The irregular layout on the roof guarantees an organic look to the clay. But I have to avoid getting too many straight edges showing through. I'm getting through a lot of PVA and a lot of clay. At least it's cheap. I've added sand like before, and when it's dry, everything gets the same dark grey paint. You'll also see I'm working over onto the pieces I'd already finished, blending them in. I'm dry brushing heavily just like before. And we're looking pretty good. Just the ink washes to go. Plenty of black. And while it's wet, I'm adding my green and my yellow. But I'm not coming too far into the center of the roof with this. If you remember the other caves, I added dashes of color into the rock, lines of minerals perhaps. I've got some pale blue and some magenta, and I've added pearl iridescent white to give it a metallic shine. At last I can add it into the rest of the mountain. I'll pin the corners in place while it dries. I'm going to blend it all together now with a thin coat of clay smeared on the surface, just because I don't want Undercrag Mountain to look like a series of boxes piled up on top of each other. I think this approach is a bit more interesting. I've also taken the opportunity to sculpt the space behind Hanging Peak House. That area's been sitting empty and unfinished for a while. It's been bothering me. I'll just leave it flat grey for now and fix it all up later. And there we are at last. High Keep Cavern District. Next week, we'll be heading back outside again for some very interesting houses. In the meantime, I hope you've enjoyed this episode, and I hope to see you next time. Bye for now.